We're going to start with MP Cram.
Minister Eyre, it's good to have you here in Ottawa, if only virtually. When this bill was being debated in the House of Commons, and whenever this issue comes up in question period, we often hear from some of the other parties about the need to, quote unquote, end fossil fuel subsidies. And we've heard this catchphrase so often that the casual observer could be forgiven for thinking that governments such as yours must be on the verge of bankruptcy because of all these fossil fuel subsidies that you're apparently lavishing on every oil and gas company that you can find. And so I was wondering if you could set the record straight about what are the effects of oil and gas companies and the oil and gas sector on the budget of the government of Saskatchewan.
Well, obviously, and I referenced it in my remarks, we can balance our budget in large measure because of now the upswing that we are seeing in resource prices, not only in oil and gas, of course, but in uranium, in potash, and we really are poised here in Saskatchewan to be a critical minerals powerhouse. We have been on the downside in terms of resource revenue and royalty generation when things weren't so good, and we've been very diligent about making the investments that we have in diversifying the economy. And we've seen that, for example, with our enormous development in the helium sector, for example, which or lithium. And I call it a beautiful irony that lithium here in Saskatchewan is being extracted from oil field brine, oil well brine. And so we are using something from that sector to power the electric vehicles of the future. There are amazing synergies, and there are amazing synergies as well, of course, in helium. I was in Houston before Christmas speaking to investors who didn't realize that Saskatchewan had done the work for as long as we have around royalty regimes and in other areas to foster and develop helium. And so we are doing everything we can in around the clock and in the downward times and in the upward times to diversify and build on our strengths. I think that's the most important thing. We have incentives on the books in Saskatchewan that follow private investment. It doesn't lead private investment in helium, for example, in lithium, that fosters research in new to Saskatchewan innovative areas. But again, these are around royalty, transfer credits for royalties in the province. So very efficient method to foster new investment in new areas, infrastructure, for example, North American Helium's new facility near Battle Creek, Saskatchewan benefited from our oil and gas investment processing incentive. So we've done everything we can to build on what we have. It all adds into the mix in the end for Saskatchewan's bottom line. But to call everything a subsidy when it is building on strengths in existing sectors, we simply can't turn our back on the traditional sectors in this province and on the workers, the 30,000 workers who benefit from the oil and gas sector in this province, and who often have amazingly transferable skills into things such as helium. But calling everything a subsidy and turning our back on that would be blind to our economic potential in Saskatchewan.
So, Minister Eyre, I actually used to work in the Provincial Ministry of Natural Resources back when it was called the Ministry of the Economy. And I recall that in order for an oil and gas company to even get started, they had to bid on the oil and gas drilling rights. And I understand that brought in about $5 million in revenue just a couple of weeks ago for the government. And then there are royalties for every barrel of oil that's extracted out of the ground. And then there's, of course, the income tax that the company has to pay. So if you add up all of that, how much is the oil and gas sector worth in a typical year to the budget of the government of Saskatchewan?
Well, it has been upward in depending on the year. there's been into the hundreds of millions of dollars, obviously, which impact everything, schools and social services, highways, hospitals. It is an enormous impact when you add in all resource revenues across the board, potash, uranium, and the rest. It is that which drives our province. They are our major economic builders. And we have made announcements in recent years also around forestry. That has been an incredibly on the upswing in the province as well. So again, an attempt to build on strengths, diversify based on what we have and what we can be. And there's an enormous dollar impact.
Okay, Minister Eyre, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us today, and I look forward to more questions and answers throughout the morning.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Cram.
Thank you, Mr. Cram.